George Armstrong Custer's own account of Custer's last stand. There's a piece of writing, less known than the thunderous battle it precedes, that gives us a rare window into the mood and movement of Custer's 7th Cavalry in the days leading up to their end at the Little Bighorn. Now, it doesn't spell out the battle itself, no tactics, no gun smoke, but what it does offer is something quieter, more telling, a portrait of men on the march. There's a curious mix in the tone, dark clouds gathering over campfires, yet moments of rough humor, like the tale of a sergeant who didn't quite take to river crossing. This dispatch, reportedly written on June 22, 1876, came to light weeks later, published by the New York Herald after the dust had settled and the headlines screamed of disaster. The paper hinted it may have been penned by none other than Custer himself, though nobody knows for sure. What we do know is that he'd sent off a piece to Galaxy magazine just before departing the Tongue River, before fate caught up with him. We also have the last written account from Mark Kellogg, a reporter who rode with Custer and filed his final story the day before the battle. It adds one more layer to the picture, soldiers on the trail, unaware they were riding into legend. A final word from the field, days before the storm. Yellowstone River Camp, near the mouth of the Rosebud. June 22, 1876. Gentlemen, before I set down the events of these last few days, let me speak plainly. This letter may well be my last, and if it finds its way to your hands, it will have traveled farther and through more chaos than most men do in a lifetime. There was a mishap not long ago, one that took a good man down and nearly silenced the mail for this whole campaign. Our dispatches were sent out from the Powder River some days back, carried by a small crew, 3 men from Hazen's 6th Infantry. They had orders to ferry the mail by boat to Fort Buford. Simple enough. But fate rarely sticks to the plan. Just as the sergeant, Fox by name, stepped aboard with the mail pouch in hand, the boat capsized. Just like that, all 3 were flung into the river's cold grip. The others were hauled out by some quick-thinking bystanders, but Fox never surfaced. A soldier for 22 years, he vanished beneath those muddy waters without so much as a shout. The mail bag sank with him, but not for long. It bobbed between the riverbank and the steamer like a stubborn ghost before finally being hauled in with boat hooks. When we opened it, the letters were a soggy mess, stamps peeled off, pages swollen and torn like old parchment. But credit where it's due, Captain Grant Marsh of the Far West, one of the finest men to ever steer a boat up the Missouri, spent the night with his crew drying, sorting, and sealing each letter. Thanks to their effort, the mail headed out again at dawn. One can only hope my words from Powder River were among those salvaged. Fox's death hit us hard. Not for its drama, but because he was one of those soldiers who never asked for praise. He'd just returned from Washington, trying to secure an ordnance sergeant appointment, a modest dream for an old warhorse who'd spent more than 2 decades in uniform. He was the kind of man who held the line so the rest of us could sleep at night. We buried him in our own way, with silence, respect, and a glance downriver. Now, to matters of the campaign. Major Reno, commanding 6 companies of the 7th Cavalry, was dispatched under strict written orders. His path was clear: follow the Powder River to its tributaries, loop through Mispa Creek, then cut over to Pumpkin Creek, and descend along the Tongue River back to the Yellowstone. It was a long sweep, intended more for presence than action. General Terry, leading this expedition, made it clear, Reno was not to drift toward the Rosebud. That area was being held in reserve for a larger strike involving the whole cavalry force, when the time was right. But not everyone was aligned on that point. Some officers, including Reno himself, believed Sitting Bull and his warriors were lying in wait along the Powder. Others, including Custer and the rest of us in command, had our doubts. We figured the real gathering of tribes, if they were indeed gathering, would be near the Rosebud and Little Bighorn. That land, rich in shelter and water, was better suited for a large village. Terry's concern was clear and shared by many of us. An early move toward the Rosebud could spook the tribes and scatter them before we had the strength to strike. Flush the covey, he called it, a hunter's phrase that needs no explanation to men who've walked a field with a rifle in hand. We didn't want to stir the nest before we had the means to deal with what came flying out of it. That's why Custer and the rest of the 7th sat tight, 2 short marches from where we believed the hostiles might be. It wasn't an easy wait. Nobody likes being sidelined while a brother regiment moves out, especially not Custer's men. But it was necessary, or so we were told. The fear was, if Reno or anyone else pushed too far too fast, the Indians, always watching, always listening, would vanish into the plains like smoke in wind. When Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Reno finally returned after 10 long days away from the main column, the reaction among the expedition's ranks was anything but welcoming. From the commanding general down to the newest recruit, disappointment hung heavy in the air. And for good reason. Reno's absence had been marked not by any victories or meaningful progress but by a string of choices so questionable they threatened to undermine the entire campaign's fragile prospects. Now, before we condemn Reno too harshly, it's worth stepping back and understanding the complexities of the situation. Frontier warfare was rarely clean or straightforward. Indian scouts and cavalry alike grappled daily with unfamiliar terrain, elusive enemies, and a chain of command often strained by competing personalities and urgent orders. The popular accounts that paint Reno's return as universally greeted with disgust may be a touch overstated. Soldiers like Sergeant Dan Knipe and Private John McGuire, who witnessed the Powder River expedition firsthand, never expressed outright contempt. Instead, they offered a more nuanced view, one tempered by the brutal realities of such campaigns. Still, the hard truth remains, Reno had disobeyed clear, written orders issued personally by General Alfred Terry. These orders were not idle suggestions but the product of careful planning, designed to use the natural contours of the land, valleys and watercourses to maximize the expedition's strength and cohesion. Yet Reno took his force first to the mouth of the Little Powder River, then crossed over to the Tongue River, deviating sharply from his prescribed route. Instead of following the Tongue downstream, where he was to reunite with the main command, he inexplicably turned off course and headed toward the Rosebud River, an area he had been expressly cautioned to avoid. Why? That question remains as murky now as it was then. No definitive explanation was ever provided. Some speculate that Reno acted on incomplete or faulty intelligence, others suggest a hesitation born of uncertainty or fear. What's clear is that this detour put him on the trail of a significant Indian encampment, an abandoned village of 380 lodges recently vacated but still warm with the promise of pursuit. Here lay a pivotal moment, the chance to strike a decisive blow against a formidable native force. The trail was fresh, the enemy was still within reach. History shows us that many a cavalry commander has won his reputation on such opportunities, through decisive action, dogged pursuit, and the willingness to test the limits of endurance. Yet Reno's resolve faltered. After following the trail about 20 miles, he called off the chase and ordered a retreat. This wasn't just a tactical withdrawal, it was seen as a failure of nerve and leadership. The very essence of cavalry warfare, especially on the plains and in the rugged West, demanded aggression and perseverance. Had Reno pressed forward, even if he had initially broken orders, a victory might have redeemed him. Instead, he left his men, and the expedition, as casualties of indecision. General Terry's reaction was swift and blunt. Meeting Reno upon his return, Terry did not mince words. Reno's actions were a flagrant breach of orders, and while the full consequences had yet to be measured, the implications were dire. The official reports hinted strongly at a court-martial. A disciplinary action well-deserved, many believed. The guides accompanying Reno noted that the Indian village had moved deliberately but had left only recently, meaning Reno could have intercepted them with a sustained march of less than 2 days. The missed opportunity was, by all accounts, staggering. Few officers in the annals of frontier campaigns squandered so clear a chance to inflict a telling defeat on native forces. Understanding the gravity of the situation, the Army's top commanders acted decisively. Reinforcements arrived promptly. General George Armstrong Custer, known for his bold and often reckless leadership, brought 12 companies of the 7th Cavalry and Indian Scouts to the area. They were joined by General Terry and his staff aboard the steamboat Far West, which had steamed ahead to establish a forward base of operations. General Gibbon's troops were already positioned across the Yellowstone River, waiting to coordinate efforts with Terry and Custer. These three commanders convened and agreed on a plan. Custer would take the fight directly to the Indians, marching up the Rosebud Valley to the point where Reno had abandoned the pursuit. From there, he would track the enemy as far as his men and horses could endure. Custer's approach was pragmatic and unforgiving. To maintain the speed and mobility necessary for a successful chase, he ordered his men to travel light, abandoning wagons and tents in favor of living off the land and moving like the very warriors they sought to confront. This meant subsisting on game and fresh meat, carrying only essential rations packed on horses, and embracing the brutal conditions of the western wilderness. Gibbon moved toward the mouth of the Bighorn River, with Terry following aboard the Far West, stocked with a full month's supply of provisions. Their joint aim was to push as far upriver as navigation would allow, likely to the vicinity of the old Fort C.F. Smith, where they would regroup with Custer after his extended scout. Such boldness was characteristic of Custer, who often favored speed and surprise over caution. Before setting off, he advised his officers to carry extra salt and maintain a reserve of rations, underscoring that he would not turn back for lack of supplies if the trail proved long. This willingness to embrace hardship was essential in a theater where supply lines were tenuous and the enemy elusive. A correspondent from the Herald joined Custer's command, promising to deliver an unvarnished account of any encounters, whether they resulted in battle or a desperate chase. This presence helped shape the public narrative, bringing the harsh realities of frontier warfare to readers far removed from the plains. As the column marched from Powder to Tongue River, Custer's men passed through a stark reminder of the stakes involved. In a deserted winter camp, they discovered the skeletal remains of a white man, a cavalry soldier, by the uniform fragments found nearby. The yellow cord on his coat and the letter C on his buttons identified his rank and unit, but his identity was otherwise lost. Near his bones lay the remnants of a large fire, a grim indication that he had been held captive and tortured, a fate not uncommon for those caught in the fierce conflicts between Native Americans and the U.S. military. The soldier's tragic end, shrouded in mystery, served as a haunting symbol of the unforgiving and often brutal nature of the Indian Wars. If you enjoyed the video, hit subscribe and like to show your support. Don't forget to tap the bell to get notified of new videos. Thanks for watching.